Welcome to Optimal Game State. This week is Adepticon, and we're expecting lots of fun reveals for Warcry specifically, but also for a bunch of other Age of Sigmar games, which usually means more models for Warcry. That we're due a Skaven refresh is basically known, and I'm pretty excited about it. Part of that is because of the Rat Hunters campaign from the Tome of Champions 2021. This campaign is for 1 or 2 players facing off against the Vermintide. The idea here is you pull together whatever Skaven model you have and turn into a warband. Then there's a page which explains how the Skaven play, and you and a buddy, or you yourself, play against it. There are 4 missions in the campaign in total. 3 use combinations of mission cards from the original core box, while the last one is a special mission. The last mission is basically a massive swarm. The Skaven warband has 1200 points, and every fighter that dies comes back at the start of the next turn from a board edge. Our heroes have to survive, kill the enemy leader, who only turns up on turn 2, and then get out alive. It's a pretty cool campaign, and it's something I've wanted to try for a while now. One thing I did want to do with it, though, was to see if we could take that system and use it for other warbands. It would be nice to be able to set up some additional scenarios and give a solo play option for it. So let's first look at the rules we have. Now, what we're going to be looking at is page 80 of the 2021 Tome of Champions, and the text can also be found in Warcry. There isn't actually a list for the Skaven warband in the book, so that could be a claw leader with a ton of clan rats, or it could be a death master with a bunch of stormfiends. Very different warbands that would play in very different ways. During the hero phase, the Skaven do not get any dice. Instead, it's assumed that they have 3 singles for initiative. They don't use hero dice in the normal way to power abilities. So if we have been picking a death master, it would never use its running death ability. When it comes time for the Skaven fighters to activate, a player selects one to activate. There isn't any guidance on this, unfortunately. I'm not sure whether the intention is for you to pick the best option for the Skaven warband or the best option for you. That's not great. If you're like me, that means you'll probably play the best possible option for the Skaven every time for fear you might be doing it wrong. Another player might think that it's intended for you to game it a little, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's not clear. After you have picked a fighter, you get to activate it. You first determine what state the fighter is in. That's either close or far. Close basically means a Skaven can hit an enemy without moving, while far means they do need to move. Then you roll a d3 to work out what's happening. On a 1, the fighter will take a special recuperate ability, removing 5 damage, and will then do an attack if it's close and move if it's far. On a 2, the fighter will take 2 actions. Each action will be an attack if they can, and a move instead if they can't. So that'll be an attack if close, or a move attack, or a move if they're far. On a 3, it's the same as 2, but the Skaven fighter in close also gets to use a special ability Deadly Strike, which will do d6 damage to a nearby target. And if they're far, after they take their first move action, they get to trigger Charge, which does d3 damage to a nearby fighter. And yeah, that's it. For move actions, there are actually a ton of conditions, so there are lots of considerations around avoiding dumb stuff like climbing dangerous terrain and ending up next to pits. There's also some short guidance around attacks. Basically, it's just attack the nearest enemy and use the weapon profile with the shortest range. Out of the 4 missions, 2 involve the players trying to kill the Skaven leader. One is about players holding treasure, while the last is a straight kill mission. We do have to allow a certain amount of leeway, of course, but letting the heroes activate the Skaven leader as a first action and have a double move towards the heroes in an assassination mission does seem like a misstep. It definitely got the job done. We could play out that scenario, but I think we can do a little bit better if we try. We can make it a little bit smarter. My next step was to Curse City. So it's Warcry adjacent, in that it's packed with a bunch of Age Sigmar models, and the bad guys are controlled by the game. So let's see how they do it there. At the start of each turn, you take the deck of initiative cards, you shuffle them, and you lay them face down into the initiative track. There are 4 hero initiative cards and 4 enemy initiative cards. It's quite an interesting mechanic, and there are ways for the heroes to meddle with the order, which is very cool. Each enemy group has a card with a table similar to the one from Vermintide. Common activations include Advance, which is a move and attack, and Charge, which is a move, and then an attack. In this game, enemies typically only attack once, so we don't have any attack actions, unless there's a special ability for the hostile group. Frostgrave is another popular skirmish fantasy game, and although it doesn't have solo play baked into it, the Perilous Dark supplement does add some guidelines on solo play. Here we have some notable additions. First, enemy fighters are activated in health order, so the highest health activates first. Will it work for Warcry? It could, although going by points cost might be a little bit better. If a fighter can hit multiple targets, it will go for the one with the lowest health. My gaming group refers to this as playing good Titan, a reference to an old Avalon Hill game where stacking damage to get kills is far better than spreading it out. We also have a clause where if a fighter can move into combat in one move, it will do so. So avoiding a case where a double move just makes them an easy kill for targets, or for heroes. Stargrave is a sci-fi version of Frostgrave, and it also has some nice additions. Dead or Alive is a bounty hunting game where you're trying to track down marks, so it's a supplement. For general non-mark enemies, there is a flowchart to decide what they should do. Are they in combat? Is the mark in combat? Can they shoot someone? Can they move and then shoot someone? Is there a point of interest on a map to move to? Otherwise, they just move randomly. That's pretty nice. Then there is also an additional table for each mark, which is basically a special character. The logic for those fighters is specific, so that they're a special character, they can do interesting things. Ultimately, as they're a mark for the bounty hunters, they will do everything they can to stay alive, with each having a different condition on when they start moving for the exit. And that's something that definitely help out the Skaven leader in those assassination style missions. The last option to take inspiration from is another Joseph McCullough game, Rangers of Shadow Deep, where the others are primarily two-player games with some additional rules for solo play. Rangers of Shadow Deep is intended as a solo game from the start. As with Stargrave, it has a nice flowchart checking if the evil creatures are in combat, if they have a hero line of sight, and if the scenario has a target point. We mentioned this idea with Stargrave, although Rangers of Shadow Deep probably presents it better. In Rangers, you put together your warband and you play through a fixed set of scenarios. So rather than picking any enemy warband and randomly deciding the mission, everything is laid out. Honestly, this is probably the best way to approach a solo game, as it accounts for everything, and you can make adjustments to the enemy warband and the mission to keep things interesting. Another element is the use of an event table, or in this case, an event deck. So each event will only happen once. Usually these random events would involve reinforcements for the bad guys, but it could also include some twist to shake up the battle. I do think having random elements like this is important, as we don't want every game to play out in exactly the same way. Definitely a danger when we have an artificial logic for the enemy. Okay, there are some interesting options in there. Let's see what we can do to bring it all together. Curse City does have some really great elements. The first is the use of the charge and advanced terminology for activations. Now, all that really does is tighten up the wording a little bit. So charge is moved and attack, advance is moved and move, and for Warcry, we would also need a third term for attacked and attack, maybe something like assault. So the default activations for fighter will be advance, charge, or assault, depending on the conditions. Ignoring for a second the logic around which of these options we pick, we can also tidy up the move and attack options. For example, when making the second move in advance, the fighter would not move into melee. When making the move part of a charge, if you can reach multiple targets, go for the target with the lowest health, and don't join melee with multiple targets if you can avoid it. Stuff like that. What I'll do is I'll add a documented description where we tighten up some of the wording. I also quite like the way Curse City uses initiative cards to work out which enemies to activate. That specific system doesn't quite work with Warcry though, where we already have alternating actions back and forth. Now we could revamp the system, but that would be a pretty big change. One way we can add a little element of the unknown is to use cards to decide which of the three battle groups of the enemy will activate. So it's either shield, hammer, or dagger. That means we'll never quite sure which fighter is going to activate, but we'll have a rough idea. If we take a normal deck of playing cards, we can then take diamonds to be the number of fighters in the shield group. We can take a number of clubs equal to numbers in the hammer, and a number of spades equal to the number in the dagger battle group. Then we can shuffle that up and randomly draw a card to indicate which of the battle groups should activate. Then we activate the highest point fighter from that group and set that card aside. So in this way, we can have a little bit of randomization in it. Arguably, we could just use the highest points, but once we have this enemy deck, we can go a little bit further with this, as I'll talk about later. Now, one of my frustrations with the Vermintide rules is that they don't use any of the Skaven special abilities, instead replacing them with more generic damage boosts. To properly nail this idea of a solo Warcry variant, we would like to be able to use it with any warband. When talking about Rangers of Shadowdeep, I suggested a fully developed scenario is probably peak. But to do that, what we need to do is have a generic core system that can be used with anything. Then we build out scenario special rules on top of that. To incorporate the abilities again, the easiest way is to roll hero dice for the bad guys and plan out what their ability usage is. But honestly, that's a lot of mental overhead. Our players should be focusing on their own game plan rather than double thinking for the enemy. There are probably a few different ways to do this, but currently my thought is to add a few more cards into our enemy deck. If we add a 2 of hearts and a 3 of hearts, then whenever we draw one of these, we will then open up a double or triple ability, and we will draw another card to see what fighter will be using it. Now, this isn't going to be perfect, especially for warbands where there are key abilities to use that require specific fighters. It will take some of the mental load off the players though, and it will let us still use abilities. I'm tempted to suggest that the bad guys are always given 2 singles for initiative, and then we maybe have 2 double cards and a single triple in the deck. That should give them a decent amount of abilities. Depending on the warband, we could also add in some additional guidance on how exactly to use the abilities, with maybe some fighters choosing to pass them on to the next fighter. But the broad strokes of a deck with random battle groups activating and abilities randomly turning up seems like a solid approach. I think that gives us a good engine. After that, we add special rules to accommodate situations specific to a scenario. For example, a treasure mission might make treasure as a point of interest. And then when a fighter has treasure, they will not take a charge activation, and advanced actions will be taken away from the enemy rather than towards them. We could also have special rules specific to warbands. For example, a Skaven warband with a Deathmaster could retain triples until the Deathmaster gets activated running death. Or clan rats just won't use doubles because that's what the pack masters get to use their crack the whips. This won't make the warband a tournament level player, but it will make it act a little bit smarter. Now we do have reactions, and reactions add a little wrinkle to the whole thing, and probably should be covered as a special clause for each warband. Musketeer is a great example. It has very specific condition when it can trigger, and we would also need to add in a few more conditions on whether we should trigger it or not. The 2 primary uses here are defensive to move a big fighter like a rat ogre into melee, or to let a fighter about to be attacked to disengage to safety. It'll be a pain, but we'd essentially have to write up a logic chain. In some instances, like with Musketeer probably, it might be too complex to worry the player with. While we can do it, maybe we shouldn't be adding all that extra mental load. So something to think about. I'll try to get all of this into a pack, updating the Rat Hunters campaign in the next day or two, and we'll see if we can get some pretty cards for the enemy deck if you want to print them out. So keep an eye out for that. If you have any suggestions on how we can improve this, please do let me know in the comments. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Each week I put up a new video talking about one of Games Workshop's specialist games. The goal is always to try and make the best possible 2-player experience. If this is something you'd find interesting, please subscribe to the channel and comment to let me know what you'd like to see in future.